Ladies and gentlemen, whenever two arch rivals meet, it's always a thrilling contest, be it cricket, football, or any other sport. In chess, one such matchup is Viswanathan Anand playing against Magnus Carlsen. Viswanathan Anand is the Indian chess legend who is also a five-time world champion, taking on arguably the greatest chess player of all time, Magnus Carlsen, who is also a five-time world champion. This matchup happens in the Global Chess League that was held in 2023, where Magnus is in a must-win scenario. So let's jump onto this video and analyze this exciting match. In this match, Anand is playing with the white pieces and Magnus is playing with the black pieces. Remember, this is a must-win match for Magnus Carlsen. The match starts with e4 and e6. The French defense is chosen by Magnus Carlsen. d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4. This is called the Winawer variation of the French defense. Vichy plays e5, c5 played by Magnus, and pawn to h3, asking the bishop about its intentions. The most common move in this position is bishop takes knight, and Magnus does so. Pawn takes bishop. Knight to c6 is played. White plays queen to g4, targeting the g7 pawn. So to mitigate this threat, Magnus plays g6, and Anand straight away plays h4, h6, h5, g5, locking up the position in the king side. But the king side looks extremely dangerous for Magnus. Vichy now launches his f pawn into action. Magnus brings out his queen to a5, targeting the c3 pawn and a fork to the king and the rook. So to counter this, Vichy plays bishop to d2. And now f5 is played, an excellent move in this position because if you capture on the f pawn, then the knight develops, targeting the queen and gaining an extra tempo, and also the knight aims to sit here. So Anand retreats with his queen and g4, completely locking up the position. D takes c5, Magnus develops his knight, Vichy also develops his bishop, and now queen takes c5. Anand brings out his knight, and Magnus played knight to h5, trying to get this outpost. Vichy now asks for a queen trade because you can see Magnus's queen is a lot more powerful than Anand's queen. So the queens get exchanged, and we have this position. a4 played by Anand, and king to f7, connecting both the rooks. Rook hb1 played, getting the open b file. Magnus defends by pushing his pawn to b6. Now Anand plays bishop back to c1. You can see such a great move in this position. His main aim is to maneuver the bishop in an open diagonal, as marked. And now Magnus brings his other knight to action. The bishop goes into that open diagonal, and see this knight maneuver of Magnus. He came from here to here, then goes back, and now targets the b7 square to get to the c5 square. What an incredible maneuver that Magnus has calculated. Bishop to b4. The knight gets to the b7 square. Anand now centralizes his knight. Rook a to b8 played. The logic behind this move may be putting the knight to the c5 square, and if bishop takes either of the knights, then b takes c5, and this rook also comes in an open fight. Anand now plays knight to b3, asking for an exchange. See, if Magnus exchanges the knight, the pawn structure gets improved. So instead, Magnus brings his knight to the c4 square. Bishop captures the powerful knight, pawn takes, and knight to d4. Rook to c8 is played. a5, again asking questions in this position. Magnus again trying to lock the position by playing b5. White plays rook to d1 and again gaining an open file for rook. Magnus backs his bishop for the rook, also to target for the open file. The knight comes back. Vichy's aim is to double up the rook on the d file and trade as many pieces as possible. Magnus sees this, he checks the current scorecard of his team, and he realizes that this is a must-win situation for him. He plays rook to d8, and Anand doubles up his rook on the d file. Rook cross d4, and the bishop comes back. Rook to d2 is played, and you can see this square is freed up for the knight. This position seems like a dead draw because the bishops are also opposite colored. Most of these cases, these matches would end up in a draw. But again, this is a do or die match for Magnus. He absolutely needs to find a breakthrough in this position. And now in this position, Magnus Carlsen plays g3 check, a very out of the box kind of move, because if you take on the pawn with the king, the rook comes to g8, and after you move, this pawn could be captured. And instead, if you take with the knight, then again the rook comes in. The rook then infiltrates here, targeting this pawn. The game getting a lot more spicier. Anand sees this and does not capture the pawn. He goes king to g1. Magnus brings up his rook on the g file. Knight to d4 is played again, targeting the bishop. And Magnus plays rook to d8 because if you take the bishop, then the rook is hanging. Anand plays bishop to d6. Knight cross bishop is not possible because you simply take on the bishop and target the rook. Magnus played bishop to e4, and now the bishop goes back. And now rook to d5 is played. See, the main motive of this move is another outstanding knight maneuver. Magnus aims to bring his knight to the d8 square and then to the c6 square, where this knight is pinned. So Viswanathan Anand also sees this and he plays a great move, that is king to f1. Magnus plays knight to d8 and Anand plays king to e1, and he supports the rook using his king. Black brings his knight to the c6 square, and you can see if the rooks get raided, this pawn is hanging, and the g3 pawn is a huge headache for white. So Vishy plays knight to e2, and after the rook trade, bishop takes g2, knight takes g3. And again, this position is very equal and looks nothing much can happen. Bishop to f3 played, targeting this pawn. This knight cannot move. So Anand plays king to e3, bishop goes to d1, and again king to d2. Now the bishop goes to g4. King to e3, and Magnus now asks whether Anand is ready to give away his bishop for a knight. Because if he does not do so, this knight will come here and will attack this pawn. Anand has to take on the knight, and he does so. King takes, and after some maneuver, you can see all the squares that are marked with red. The black king cannot enter the white position. There are no breakthroughs visible. So what does Magnus do? He brings his king forward and now plays king to c5. Anand goes back, bishop to d1 targeting the pawn, king to c1, bishop goes back, and king now goes to b2. Simply it looks that there are no visible breakthroughs in this position. But due to the pawn structure of white, black has a pawn breakthrough, that is b4. Magnus plays it desperately, and after pawn takes, if you take with the king, you win this pawn, but this is a fortress. You cannot break through in this position. The king cannot enter the white territory. So instead of taking the pawn, Magnus played excellent move, that is king to d4, and he enters the white territory. c3 check is the only move. King comes to d3 and b5. Now you can see Viswanathan Anand is pushing for the win. It seems so. The pawn takes a6. This pawn is 2 square away from queening. And now Magnus plays king to d2. See, king to d2 is a very important move for this pawn to queen. Else, if king to d2 is not played early, then the white king can stay in the c1 square because black just has a light square bishop and it is not going to target the king. a7 played. Now the pawn is only 1 square away from queening. Magnus now played bishop to d5. You may wonder that he should have played b4 straight away. But this move comes up with a check with the knight, which deflects the king from the very important d2 square, and now white king can come to c1. So saying all this, Magnus played bishop to d5. And now Anand plays an incredible knight sacrifice. And now it simply looks that the game is over. Because after pawn takes e6, how do you stop this pawn? Using this bishop. If you take on a6, then this pawn is queening. So what will be his reply? b4, the only move which makes sense. e7. Now Anand has a choice which pawn to queen. b takes c3. The only logical move is king to a2, because if king came to a3, then the pawn would queen and give a check to the king. c2 played, and now Anand has a choice which pawn to promote. He promotes the a pawn, and Magnus has a wry smile in his face after this move, because Anand has a very nasty trick upon his sleeve. The point is, if you take the queen, the e pawn queens, and after Magnus queens, queen to e3 check, simply sacrificing the queen, and if you take, then this is a stalemate. Magnus sees this stalemate trick, but he has to take on the queen, and Anand promotes his new queen. Magnus comes back with his bishop, defending it and also preparing for the promotion. The only move which draws for Anand is queen to a4, but he blunders. He plays queen to d8 check. Magnus guards with his bishop, queen to d4. And in this position, Magnus Carlsen played the incredible move under promotion to knight, giving a check to the king. The king cannot come to the a1 square because this is a fork. So the king goes to a3 and c3. You see, a fortress is created by Magnus Carlsen that Anand just cannot breach into. There are no visible threats that white can create for black. Queen to f2 check is met with knight defending it, and there are no more checks. This pawn is simply unstoppable. Anand plays queen to b6. Magnus removes his knight from the promotion square. Queen cross h6, pawn push, and here Viswanathan Anand resigned the match. This is what Magnus Carlsen is all about. This is why he is also called the greatest chess player of all time. A match which seemed that it was a draw for most of the time, Magnus somehow found a breakthrough, and the under promotion to knight in the endgame is simply a genius move by Magnus Carlsen. This is one of the best matches that these two legends have played against each other. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.